I might be in jail, I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're gonna have to keep on saying that. You're gonna have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You've got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the Panthers are doing. That's what the Panthers are doing all over the world. We're not a racist organization because we understand that racism is an excuse used for capitalism. And we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism.
If we don't hate the motherfucking white people, we hate the oppressor, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow.
We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people.
There was a time in America when just speaking out for justice could put a target on your back. And in the 1960s, Chicago, one young man did more than speak. He organized, unified, and inspired. His name was Fred Hampton. He was just 21 years old when he was killed in his sleep during a police raid. But what led to that night, and why was he seen as such a threat? Dear viewers, this is not a mere story of a life cut short, but a deeper look into what happens when someone challenges the systems around them and what those systems do in response. Join us as we explore one of the most tragic yet inspiring stories of the 20th century. This is the life of Fred Hampton, his rise, his dreams, and the dark forces that work to silence him. Give this video a like to show your support, and let's begin this unforgettable journey.
Me, myself, you know, I was born in a so-called bourgeois community and had some of the better things you could see in life. And I found that it was more people starving than it was people eating. And I found that more people didn't have clothes than they did have clothes. And I found that I just happened to be one of the few. And I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't stop doing what I'm doing until all those people are free.
Fred Hampton entered the world on August 30th, 1948, in the Chicago area, at a time when the civil rights struggle in America was approaching a boil. His parents had moved north from Louisiana as part of the Great Migration, seeking better opportunities outside the Jim Crow South. They settled in the suburb of Maywood, Illinois, where they both found work at a local cornstarch plant. In this working-class black community, young Fred grew up hearing stories of racial injustice and resistance. His family even had a personal connection to one of the era's most galvanizing tragedies. They were friends with the family of Emmett Till, the black teenager whose brutal murder in 1955 became a defining moment in the fight for racial justice, igniting a movement that would forever change America. These early influences planted in Hampton an acute awareness of racial injustice from a very young age. Hampton was an active and bright child, both in the classroom and on the playground. Even as a boy, he displayed a precocious sense of community responsibility. At just 10 years old, Fred began hosting weekend breakfasts for children in his neighborhood, personally cooking and serving food to kids who might otherwise go without a good meal. This simple act of generosity in hindsight foreshadowed the famous free breakfast programs he would later establish. It was clear early on that Hampton was a natural leader with a big heart, someone who believed in taking care of his community. By his teenage years in the early 1960s, Hampton's world was being shaped by the great currents of the civil rights movement. He attended Proviso East High School in Maywood, where he excelled academically and athletically, graduating with honors in 1966. But it was his passion for justice that truly set him apart. At a school where black students often face subtle and overt discrimination, Hampton became an outspoken advocate for change. He led student walkouts to protest the exclusion of black nominees for homecoming queen and demanded the hiring of more black teachers and administrators. These actions were bold for a teenager, and they earned him respect among peers while also drawing the cautious eye of authorities. Hampton's activism was already in full bloom while he was still in high school, an early sign of the fire that would later make him a national figure. Beyond the schoolyard, the America of Hampton's youth was roiling with change. The landmark Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court decision had declared segregated schools unconstitutional, and the Montgomery bus boycott showed the power of organized black protest. When Hampton was still a child, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, signaling victory for nonviolent activism. Yet victories in law were met with resistance and violence across the country. As Hampton came of age, he witnessed the rise of black power as a response to the limitations of nonviolence. Major cities were erupting in uprisings: Watts in 1965, Detroit and Newark in 1967, fueled by frustrations over racism and poverty. In 1966, as Hampton turned 18, the same year he graduated high school, two young activists in Oakland, California, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, formed the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The Panthers stood for a more militant approach to combating racial injustice, openly carrying weapons to police their communities against brutality, and coupling that militancy with community service programs. These national currents would soon sweep Hampton into their tide. Hampton briefly pursued higher education, studying pre-law at a local junior college after high school. He envisioned learning the law to better defend his people's rights, but it was in grassroots organizing that he truly found his calling. He joined the Youth Council of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in the West Suburban branch and quickly rose to a leadership position. In that role, Hampton demonstrated an uncanny ability to mobilize others. In a community of roughly 27,000 black residents, he recruited about 500 youth into the NAACP, a remarkable feat of organization for a teenager. With these numbers, he agitated successfully for improvements in his hometown, lobbying for better recreational facilities and educational resources for the black community. One of his notable campaigns was to demand a public swimming pool in Maywood so black children could swim safely without traveling to distant segregated pools. This campaign showed Hampton's belief that basic amenities and dignity were rights worth fighting for. It also brought him face to face with the power structure in his suburb. In 1967, after leading peaceful demonstrations for the pool, Hampton was arrested on charges of mob action. He was merely 19, but he was already viewed as a troublemaker by local law enforcement for rallying his community. Quietly, another entity had also taken notice of the young activist's efforts. Hampton's effective community organizing and growing influence did not escape the gaze of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In the mid-1960s, the FBI was increasingly fixated on black civil rights and black power leaders, fearing the rise of what FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover termed a black messiah who could unify and electrify black militant movements. Hampton's NAACP work and the swimming pool protests earned him a place on the FBI's radar. According to later accounts, by 1967, he had been added to the Bureau's Agitator Index, a list of individuals Hoover considered potential threats to national security. It was extraordinary and telling that a teenager advocating for a community pool and school integration could be seen as a national security threat. But this was the socio-political climate of 1960s America. To the establishment, the tide of black activism stirring in cities like Chicago was something to surveil, contain, and if possible, neutralize.
With no education, you have neo-colonialism instead of colonialism. What we're talking about is there has to be an educational program. That's very important, because if they don't have an education, then they're nowhere. You dig what I'm saying? They're nowhere because they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You understand me? You might get them caught up in because they're poor and they want something. And then if they're not educated, they want more, and before you know it, they'll be capitalists, and before you know it, we have Negro imperialists.
In 1968, the year that the civil rights era reached a tragic crescendo with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Hampton's path took a decisive turn. That summer, as cities mourned and raged in the wake of Dr. King's death, Hampton formally joined the Black Panther Party. He was just 19 when he started working with the Panthers, and by November 1968, he had co-founded the Illinois chapter of the BPP in Chicago. Hampton's combination of youthful energy, oratorical talent, and real organizing experience made him a natural fit for the Panthers' revolutionary program. Though Hampton was just 20, he was quickly appointed chairman of the Illinois chapter and commanded respect even from older members. To understand Hampton's rapid rise, it's important to grasp what the Black Panther Party represented in 1968. Founded just 2 years earlier in Oakland, the Panthers demanded self-determination, full employment, decent housing, education, and an end to police brutality. Known for their militant imagery, black berets, leather jackets, rifles, and raised fist salutes, they advocated armed self-defense, patrolling black neighborhoods to monitor police. Alongside this, they created community programs like free breakfasts, health clinics, and schools. This blend of militant self-defense and community care set the Panthers apart, and Fred Hampton embodied it to the fullest. In Chicago, Hampton threw himself into building the Black Panther Party's local initiatives. He helped organize a free breakfast program on the West Side that fed hundreds of school children every morning. He understood intuitively what the Panthers called survival programs, like meal services and free medical clinics, were not only alleviating immediate needs, but also winning the hearts and minds of the community. Hampton also spearheaded the opening of a free health clinic in Chicago, providing basic medical care in an underserved neighborhood. These acts were born of what the Panthers described as revolutionary love. Hampton and his comrades believed that serving the people was just as important as chanting slogans about revolution. The communities responded in kind. Hampton became beloved by many Chicago residents who saw him not as a violent rabble-rouser, but as a young man dedicated to uplifting his people. What truly distinguished Fred Hampton as a leader was his ability to build coalitions across racial and ethnic lines. He believed that class oppression and poverty were common enemies that united the poor, regardless of color. In early 1969, Hampton initiated the formation of what he called the Rainbow Coalition, an unprecedented alliance between the Black Panthers and other activist groups representing different racial constituencies. He reached out to the Young Lords, a militant organization of Puerto Rican youth in Chicago, and they joined forces. He did the same with the Young Patriots, a group of white Appalachian migrants living in Chicago's uptown neighborhood, who wore Confederate flag patches, but were beginning to see common cause with Black and brown activists in fighting poverty and police abuse.
What makes them mad about it? What makes them mad about it is that they had Black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents. They had them caught up in movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best, we think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight it with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution. Right on. Right on.
Under Hampton's leadership, these unlikely allies, blacks, Latinos, and poor whites, began to attend each other's meetings and demonstrations, forging bonds of solidarity. It was a remarkable sight in 1969. Fred Hampton standing side by side with former gang members and marginalized youth of all races, calling them brothers in the struggle. Hampton was this incredibly charismatic, young, dynamic leader who formed this rainbow coalition with Puerto Ricans and poor whites from Appalachia, recalled Jeffrey Haas, a Chicago attorney who knew Hampton and later represented his family. This coalition building was revolutionary in its own right. It directly challenged the divide and conquer tactics often used to pit communities against each other. To the FBI, it was the stuff of nightmares, a black messiah figure who could transcend racial divisions and unite the oppressed in a common front. Hampton's charisma was undeniable. He had a gift for public speaking that could move an audience to cheers, tears, or laughter as he willed. Friends noted that he had overcome a childhood stutter by studying the great orators. He memorized speeches of Dr. King and Malcolm X and absorbed the cadences of preachers in black churches. The result was electrifying. When he spoke, his voice boomed with conviction and quick rhythmic intensity, like a modern-day rapper, as Haas described, with call and response punctuations that pulled his listeners in. He could tailor his message to any audience: poor black families in housing projects, young street gang members, white college students, or law students and intellectuals. Hampton had the rare ability to make each group feel heard and valued, yet still hammer home a unifying message of class solidarity and revolutionary change. In one famous address, he thundered,
"We got to face some facts. That the masses are poor. That the masses belong to what you call the lower class. When I talk about the masses, I'm talking about the white masses. I'm talking about the black masses, and the brown masses, and the yellow masses too. You don't fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. You don't fight capitalism with no black capitalism. You fight capitalism with socialism."
Such words encapsulated Hampton's philosophy. He was a black revolutionary socialist who saw the struggle in broad, inclusive terms. This message of solidarity across racial lines was both inspirational to many and deeply unsettling to those in power. By 1969, at just 21 years old, Fred Hampton's influence had grown beyond Chicago. The Black Panther Party's national leadership took notice of the young Chicago chairman's rapid successes. The party was under siege that year. Its co-founder, Huey Newton, was incarcerated on manslaughter charges. Bobby Seale was also jailed and later famously bound and gagged during the Chicago 7 conspiracy trial, and other leaders were either underground, in exile, or facing legal battles. In this context, Hampton's star was rising as one of the most promising young voices in the movement. He was appointed to the Panthers National Central Committee and effectively became a national spokesman for the party. He traveled to speak at campuses and community meetings beyond Chicago, spreading the Panther message of self-defense and socialist revolution. To many in the movement, Hampton represented the next generation of black revolutionary leadership, following figures like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. As Hampton's profile rose, he unknowingly moved ever closer into the crosshairs of the very forces that had eliminated other black leaders before him.
The Black Panthers are recruiting criminals and hoodlums and encouraging them to engage in a broad range of terrorist activities. They are the greatest threat to the internal security of this country. We want to make it clear to black youth that if they want to be revolutionaries, they will be dead revolutionaries.
By late 1968 and into 1969, Fred Hampton had gained a formidable adversary, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. To Hoover, the Black Panther Party had become completely unacceptable. On June 15, 1969, Hoover publicly declared that the Black Panther Party, without question, represents the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. This chilling pronouncement was no idle hyperbole. It was backed by the full weight of federal action under a secret initiative known as COINTELPRO, or Counterintelligence Program. COINTELPRO was a covert FBI program originally launched in the 1950s to spy on and disrupt domestic political organizations deemed subversive. By the 1960s, its targets included civil rights groups, anti-war protesters, and black liberation movements. Hoover explicitly directed COINTELPRO agents to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalist organizations. Among the program's stated goals, one stood out with near prophetic foresight: prevent the rise of a black messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. The FBI feared the emergence of a charismatic black leader who could rally disparate black groups and potentially spark radical change nationwide. In the tumult of the late 1960s, Hoover's FB, I saw potential messiahs everywhere, from established figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad, to fiery young revolutionaries like Huey Newton of the Panthers. It wasn't long before Fred Hampton, with his gift for unity and oratory, was added to that ominous list in the Bureau's imagination. For the FBI, the Black Panthers were a special focus of COINTELPRO. In internal documents, agents referred to the party as part of the black nationalist hate groups, reflecting the Bureau's hostile view. In fact, the Panthers bore the brunt of COINTELPRO's wrath. Of 295 documented COINTELPRO actions against black groups, 233 were directed at the Black Panther Party alone. These operations ran the gamut from surveillance and infiltration to psychological warfare and outright violence. In COINTELPRO's twisted logic, breakfast programs for children or free health clinics were not commendable community service, but insidious tools of communist subversion. One FBI memo even fretted that the Panthers' free breakfast program was dangerously winning support in black communities. Agents warned that the program could be a fertile recruiting ground for the Panthers' political cause. Feeding hungry children was reimagined by Hoover's Bureau as a weapon aimed at the heart of the American status quo. Such was the climate of paranoia and racial fear in which Fred Hampton came to operate. From the moment Hampton assumed leadership in Chicago, the FBI's Chicago field office kept him under close watch. They soon planted an informant in his midst. A young man named William O'Neill had been caught for car theft and, facing prison, agreed in late 1968 to infiltrate the Panthers in exchange for leniency. O'Neill wormed his way into Hampton's organization and eventually became the head of the Panthers security in Chicago, all the while secretly reporting to his FBI handler, Special Agent Roy Mitchell. Through O'Neill, the FBI gained an intimate window into Hampton's daily activities, the layout of Panther apartments, and the internal dynamics of the Illinois chapter. O'Neill fed his handlers information about Hampton's schedule, his comrades, and the locations where weapons might be stored. He also took subtle actions to destabilize the Panthers from within. In one instance, documented later, O'Neill attempted to exploit tensions between the Chicago Panthers and other black organizations by spreading disinformation, aligning with COINTELPRO's broader goal to sow division among black militant groups. Under COINTELPRO, nothing was off limits. FBI agents and their informants wrote bogus letters to incite feuds between rival Black Panther leaders, leaked false rumors to the press to discredit activists, and in at least one case, tried to engineer cartoons to pit the Panthers against the Nation of Islam. Every tactic aimed to isolate the Panthers from potential allies and turn the public against them. Fred Hampton's rising alliances with Latino and white activists in the Rainbow Coalition would have been seen as a dire development in Hoover's eyes, the exact kind of coalition of militant black nationalist groups that COINTELPRO was determined to prevent. FBI memos obtained decades later confirmed that the Chicago office fixated on Hampton as a radical threat. They explicitly discussed strategies to neutralize him before he could unify people any further. To the Bureau, neutralization could mean a variety of outcomes: long-term imprisonment, political discreditment, or, as would become painfully clear, elimination. Hoover himself applied intense pressure on the Chicago FBI division to deal with Hampton. Agents were exhorted to use any legal or extra-legal means necessary. This pressure coincided with a hardline stance from Chicago's local law enforcement. Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan, an ambitious prosecutor with political aspirations, was similarly intent on quashing the Black Panthers in his city. The FBI's war on the Black Panthers was entering its most lethal phase, and Fred Hampton was firmly targeted by the nation's most powerful law enforcement agency.
We need some guns. Black people need some peace. White people need some peace. And we are going to have to fight. We're going to have to struggle. We're going to have to struggle relentlessly to bring about some peace, because the people that we're asking for peace, they're a bunch of megalomaniac warmongers, and they don't even understand what peace means. And we've got to fight them. We've got to struggle with them to make them understand what peace means.
In January 1969, mere weeks after Hampton helped found the Illinois Panther chapter, Chicago police arrested him on a traffic warrant while he was in the middle of taping a television interview. The message was unmistakable. No place was safe, not even a public media appearance from the long arm of the law. This was followed by a far more serious legal entanglement. A case concerning an ice cream truck incident suddenly surfaced. The year before, in the summer of 1968, Hampton had been accused of physically attacking a Good Humor ice cream truck driver in Maywood and allegedly stealing $71 worth of ice cream bars to distribute to neighborhood kids. Hampton vehemently denied the charge, and given his character and aims, the accusation struck many as dubious. Regardless, in May 1969, he was convicted of robbery for this ice cream incident and sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. Observers at the time and historians since have viewed this charge with skepticism, a trumped-up case designed to neutralize Hampton by jailing him, rather than a bona fide criminal matter. Indeed, in the context of COINTELPRO's known modus operandi of fabricating charges to hobble activists, the ice cream conviction appears less like justice and more like a pretext to sideline a troublesome young leader. Hampton served about 9 months behind bars on the ice cream conviction before being released on appeal in late 1969. During his incarceration, the pressure on the Black Panthers in Chicago intensified. Police raids on Panther offices became frequent, as did shootouts between Panthers and police in cities like Los Angeles, Oakland, and New York. In Chicago, tensions reached a boiling point on November 13, 1969, when a shootout erupted between police and Panthers at a South Side apartment. The raid left 2 Chicago police officers and 1 Panther dead, further inflaming an atmosphere of mutual fear and hostility. Although Fred Hampton was not present, authorities ominously linked his name to the violence, painting him as a leader of a cop-killing extremist group. To the public, Figures like State's Attorney Hanrahan and the Chicago Police Superintendent portrayed the Panthers as a criminal gang engaged in a war against police. They emphasized incidents like the November shootout to justify aggressive action. Inside Panther circles, there was talk that the police were deliberately provoking confrontations as a prelude to wiping out the Panthers altogether. Upon Hampton's return to Chicago after his release, he was greeted as a hero by his comrades, but he also returned to a markedly more perilous situation. He was keenly aware that he was under constant watch. Friends noticed unmarked cars tailing them. Hampton's phone was likely tapped. Years later, documents would confirm extensive FBI wiretaps on Panther phones. Undeterred, Hampton doubled down on his activism. He gave rousing speeches, including his famous refrain, "You can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. You can run a freedom fighter out of the country, but you can't run freedom out of the country. And you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution." Those words, delivered with fiery resolve, would echo tragically after his death, but in late 1969, they served as a bold declaration that Hampton would not be intimidated by the forces arrayed against him. Still, the omnipresent stress took a toll. Some colleagues later recalled that Hampton, normally upbeat and fearless, had bouts of exhaustion and concern in the fall of 1969. He knew about the informant problem plaguing the Panthers, though he did not know the worst traitor sat right at his side. He half-joked to friends about the prospect of dying for the cause, at times even seeming to predict it. In a speech that autumn, he remarked, "I believe I will be able to die as a revolutionary in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle." Hampton had just turned 21, yet spoke about death with a mix of defiance and acceptance, as if aware that martyrdom might come early. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, plans were in motion that would vindicate Hampton's darkest suspicions. The FBI's informant William O'Neill was busier than ever. O'Neill had gained Hampton's trust enough to become the Panthers' local chief of security, meaning he was tasked with safeguarding Panther headquarters and arranging Hampton's security detail. In that role, O'Neill had access to the keys to Panther apartments and knowledge of their routines. The Chicago FBI office, coordinating with Hanrahan's prosecutors and Chicago police, began mapping out an operation to raid Hampton's residence. They framed it as a weapons search, officially a pre-dawn raid to seize illegal firearms. But everything, from the timing in the dead of night to the firepower marshaled, indicated this was no mere search. It was an attack. As later investigations uncovered, the tactical team even had a detailed floor plan of Hampton's apartment, supplied by none other than O'Neill. That floor plan pinpointed where Fred would likely be sleeping. It was, in effect, a target map, with the machinery of COINTELPRO churning in the background and local law enforcement itching to deliver a blow to the Panthers. The trap was set. Fred Hampton, under surveillance and marked by the FBI as an agitator, was living on borrowed time. Unaware of the exact shape of the danger but fully cognizant it was coming, he continued his work, meeting with community members, speaking at colleges, planning the next day's breakfast menu for neighborhood kids, all while under the shadow of a looming deadly confrontation. The slogan, "All power to the people," remained on his lips, but across town in law enforcement offices, another unspoken motto seemed to be guiding his adversaries: "Get Hampton." December 4th, 1969, Chicago, Illinois. It was a bitterly cold pre-dawn Thursday, and most of the city was fast asleep. In a modest two-bedroom apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street, Fred Hampton and several Black Panther comrades lay resting after a long night of political organizing. The 21-year-old Hampton was asleep on a mattress in the back bedroom next to his fiancée, Deborah Johnson, who was over 8 months pregnant with their first child. Unbeknownst to the Panthers inside, a heavily armed police team was gathering quietly outside the front door, preparing to strike with the element of total surprise. They had come equipped with a detailed layout of the apartment's interior, and they had a mission fueled by two forces: the zeal of law and order crusaders and the guiding hand of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Around 4:45 a.m., the silence was shattered. A dozen police officers, led by Cook County State's Attorney's Office investigators, stormed through the front door, guns drawn. A single startling gunshot rang out immediately as they burst in. That shot came from Mark Clark, a 22-year-old Black Panther on security duty who had been sitting in the front room, a shotgun in his lap. As officers kicked in the door, one of them fatally shot Clark through the heart. Clark's shotgun discharged once into the ceiling as his dying reflex pulled the trigger, the only Panther bullet fired during the entire raid. From that moment on, all gunfire came from the police. The apartment was plunged into chaos, flashes of gunfire, wood splintering, people yelling in confusion. Panthers in other rooms shouted in alarm, but most had barely a chance to grasp what was happening. The police swarmed through the apartment with grim precision, just as the floor plan had outlined. They quickly moved toward the back bedroom where Fred Hampton slept. In the seconds before they reached him, one Panther in a different room, Harold Bell, shouted out a warning. "Fred, wake up, the pigs are coming." Deborah Johnson, waking to the tumult, tried frantically to shake Hampton awake, but Hampton did not stir normally. He was groggy and unresponsive, as if in a deep stupor. It was later alleged that the FBI informant William O'Neill had surreptitiously drugged Hampton with a barbiturate sedative in his drink that evening to ensure he would not wake during the raid. As Hampton lay there, barely conscious, police bullets ripped through the walls and door of his bedroom. Officers sprayed the bed with gunfire, riddling it with holes. In the haze of adrenaline and fear, Deborah Johnson remembers screaming that she was pregnant, hoping to stave off the shooting. The gunfire paused, and officers entered the bedroom. They dragged Johnson out, physically removing the young woman from the line of fire. Fred Hampton, however, remained on the bed, bleeding and immobilized, having been struck by bullets. What came next would be seared into the memories of those present and later confirmed by forensic evidence. Panthers heard an officer ask, "Is he still alive?" as they stood over Hampton's bullet-riddled body. Then 2 gunshots erupted from the bedroom, 2 muzzle flashes aimed at Hampton's head and chest at point-blank range. Deborah Johnson in the next room heard one policeman coldly declare, "He's good and dead now." Fred Hampton was assassinated in his own bed in his home while unconscious. The raid team had effectively executed the primary target of their operation. They proceeded to fire a few more rounds through the apartment for good measure, but the brief battle was over almost as soon as it started. When the smoke cleared, 2 men were dead, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. Hampton's blood pooled on the mattress where moments before he had been sleeping peacefully. Around him, the apartment looked like a war zone. More than 80 bullet holes scarred the walls, furniture, and doors. The Panthers' simple apartment, with its posters of revolutionary leaders and its kitchen stocked for the free breakfast program, had been utterly devastated by an onslaught of police fire. Astonishingly, the 7 other occupants survived, though several were wounded. A few Panthers had minor arms at hand, but never got off a shot in the surprise onslaught. They were in shock, tending to the wounded and trying to process the horror that their inspirational young leader, Chairman Fred, had been cut down in a flash. Outside the apartment, the police officers were oddly jubilant, according to survivors. They hauled the surviving Panthers out to squad cars, some in handcuffs, and were heard laughing and congratulating each other. The bodies of Hampton and Clark were removed, and the scene was left unsecured, a crucial point that would later allow Panthers to document the truth of what happened. In the still dark hours of that morning, the police hurried to shape the public narrative of the raid. Before Fred Hampton's body had even grown cold, State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan was preparing a press statement framing the incident as a righteous shootout with dangerous criminals. Chicago awoke on December 4th, 1969, to news of a deadly gun battle between the police and Black Panthers. In initial press conferences, State's Attorney Hanrahan triumphantly claimed his officers had been attacked by the Panthers and acted in self-defense. He painted a vivid picture of Panther extremists who supposedly unleashed wild gunfire on the police as they tried to serve a lawful search warrant. Hanrahan even displayed an array of seized weapons and boasted about the courage of his men under fire. According to his account, the Panthers had opened fire first and a raging shootout ensued, implicitly justifying the tragic deaths. The immediate violent criminal reaction of the occupants in shooting at announced police officers emphasizes the extreme viciousness of the Black Panther Party, Hanrahan declared unflinchingly to the media. But this official narrative began to crumble almost as quickly as it was constructed. The survivors of the raid, the Panthers who lived through that night, told a radically different story. They insisted that Hampton and Clark had been assassinated, pure and simple, in their beds. They pointed out that most of them never even fired a weapon. How could there have been a fierce firefight? Very quickly, physical evidence backed the Panthers' version. Journalists and community members toured the bullet-riddled apartment in the days after because the police had failed to cordon it off. What they saw was telling. Nearly all bullet holes angled inward, evidence of rounds fired into the rooms, not outgoing. One much publicized claim by police was that a door jamb showed marks of incoming Panther bullets, but closer inspection revealed those holes were actually nail heads, not bullet holes at all. The Panthers shrewdly guided reporters through the apartment, preserving the crime scene in photographs that showed the trajectory of bullets. These tours made headlines, and the public's suspicions grew that the police story was false. Under mounting pressure, Hanrahan's narrative faltered. Ballistics analysis later confirmed that the police had fired dozens upon dozens of shots between 82 and 99, while only one shot, Mark Clark's reflexive discharge as he fell, came from the Panthers' side. That statistic alone starkly contradicted the notion of an even exchange of gunfire. Moreover, no stash of illegal weapons was found in the apartment. The warrant that justified the raid appeared to have been based on flimsy information at best, or as some suspected, deliberately exaggerated intelligence funneled via the FBI's informant. In short order, the charges against the 7 surviving Panthers for attempted murder and aggravated assault on the officers were dropped in 1970. Prosecutors realized those charges could never hold up once evidence showed the Panthers hardly fired a shot. As the truth of the raid emerged, outrage swept through Chicago's black community and far beyond. To many, the events had all the hallmarks of illegal lynching carried out by the state. Civil rights leaders, including Roy Wilkins of the NAACP and Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General, formed a commission of inquiry and pronounced Hampton's killing nothing short of an execution. They accused the Chicago police of blatantly violating constitutional rights and administering a summary punishment on Hampton and his comrades. Activists mobilized protests, and the phrase "Chairman Fred Hampton, murdered by the pigs," became a rallying cry at rallies. Black Panther Party Minister of Information Eldridge Cleaver, from exile in Algeria, eulogized Hampton as a martyr of the revolution. Even more moderate voices were disturbed. Newspaper editorials questioned the raid's legality and Hanrahan's credibility. The city's institutions, however, closed ranks in an attempt to insulate the perpetrators. A Cook County coroner's inquest was convened in January 1970 to determine the cause of death for Hampton and Clark. After weeks of proceedings that many criticized as one-sided, Panther survivors refused to testify, knowing they faced their own criminal charges at the time, and only police testimonies and selected evidence were presented. The coroner's jury ruled the deaths justifiable homicides. This verdict outraged Hampton's family and supporters. They derided the inquest as a sham. Attorneys for the families pointed out that the jury never heard the Panthers' direct accounts and called the proceeding a well-rehearsed theatrical performance designed to vindicate the police officers. Nonetheless, the official finding gave Hanrahan temporary vindication. Legally, the police had done no wrong in the eyes of Cook County. However, other investigations were just beginning. A federal grand jury was impaneled to look into potential civil rights violations and misconduct in the raid. In May 1970, that federal grand jury sharply criticized the police for the ill-conceived raid and the way evidence was handled afterward. The grand jury's report acknowledged many errors, essentially rejecting Hanrahan's rosy version of events, but it stopped short of issuing any indictments against the officers or officials in charge. It was a pattern that would be repeated, critical words, but no real legal consequences. It wasn't until 1971, under unrelenting community pressure, that a measure of accountability was attempted. A special prosecutor indicted Hanrahan himself, along with a dozen police officers and assistants, on charges related to obstruction of justice and conspiracy to impede the investigations of the raid. This was a remarkable turn, a sitting prosecutor being criminally charged for a cover-up. The indictment accused Hanrahan and the officers of lying about the raid, planting evidence and generally trying to whitewash the truth. Some suspected a shotgun was placed in the Panthers' apartment after the fact. Yet in 1972, a judge dismissed these charges and no one was convicted. The legal system, as Hampton supporters bitterly noted, seemed unable or unwilling to punish those responsible for his killing. However, the public had delivered its own verdict. Hanrahan was voted out of office in 1972, his career in shambles and name permanently tarnished by the affair. During these years, another story was slowly emerging that cast the raid in an even more sinister light. Thanks to investigative journalists, lawsuits by activists, and a historic break-in at an FBI office in 1971 that exposed a trove of COINTELPRO files, the role of the FBI in the Hampton raid moved from rumor to documented fact. It became known that the FBI had been running its counterintelligence war against the Panthers all along, and that Hampton in particular had been under FBI surveillance since 1967. Most damning, in 1973, lawyers for Hampton's family obtained a copy of an internal FBI memo showing that the Bureau had coordinated with Hanrahan's office ahead of the raid and even congratulated itself afterward. The memo specifically authorized a cash bonus to informant William O'Neill for providing the floor plan that led to Hampton's killing. A later Senate investigation laid bare much of COINTELPRO's dirty laundry on the national stage, confirming that the FBI's Chicago office deliberately worked with police to neutralize Fred Hampton by any means necessary. This convergence of evidence turned the Hampton case from a local tragedy into a national scandal. What many suspected from day one was now supported by paper trails. The FBI was deeply complicit. One former FBI agent, Wesley Swearingen, even came forward in the late 1970s as a whistleblower, testifying that agents had tipped off Hanrahan's raiders to expect considerable resistance, essentially priming them to shoot first and ask questions later. Hampton's grieving family and fellow Panthers did not passively accept the official narrative or the lack of criminal accountability. In 1970, barely a year after the raid, they filed a landmark civil rights lawsuit against Hanrahan, the city of Chicago, Cook County, and federal law enforcement officials, alleging a conspiracy to deprive Hampton and his comrades of their rights, in essence, to murder them. For the next 12 years, an epic legal battle unfolded in federal court as the Hampton and Clark families, along with the raid survivors, pursued some measure of justice through civil litigation. The case was arduous. Initially, a federal trial in 1975 resulted in a hung jury and then a dismissal by the judge, who sided with the defendant's motions to throw out the case before it reached a verdict. It seemed another defeat was at hand, but the family's lawyers, including Jeffrey Haas and Flint Taylor of the People's Law Office, refused to give up. They appealed, compiling a massive 200-page brief that meticulously connected the dots between the FBI's COINTELPRO program and the actions of Hanrahan's police. In a significant 1979 appellate decision, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit reinstated the case, recognizing that the evidence, if proven, indicated a shocking conspiracy to violate the Panthers' civil rights. This was a crucial acknowledgement from a high court that Hampton's death may indeed have been the result of a criminal conspiracy by government actors. Facing the prospect of a new trial with damning evidence, the defendants, which now included the FBI, since its role had been unearthed, entered settlement talks. In 1982, over a decade after the fateful raid, the civil suit was settled. The city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government agreed to pay a combined $1.85 million to 9 plaintiffs, the survivors, and the families of Hampton and Clark. At the time, it was one of the largest settlements of its kind. Though divided among many, it was a small token for the lives lost and scars endured. Importantly, while the defendants did not formally admit wrongdoing in the settlement, the outcome was widely seen as a tacit acknowledgement of official culpability. The settlement brought a form of closure to the legal chapter of the Hampton saga, but it did not end the debates or the pain. On one hand, Hampton's supporters felt vindicated that their claims of a murderous conspiracy had been taken seriously and that the families received some redress. On the other hand, the agents who planned the raid and pulled the triggers never saw a day in jail. Hanrahan, though disgraced and out of power, lived out his days quietly. The FBI men who orchestrated COINTELPRO mostly retired with pensions intact. William O'Neill, the informant, entered witness protection for a time. In a final twist of fate, racked by guilt or fear, or both, O'Neill died taking his own life in 1990 by running into traffic after giving a bombshell interview in which he admitted his role in setting up Hampton's killing. His death closed a chapter, leaving behind the unsettling legacy of a black man who betrayed his own to serve a paranoid government. The Hampton case had broader impacts as well. It fueled calls for greater oversight of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The revelations about COINTELPRO's illegal activities led to increased public scrutiny of the FBI. In the mid-1970s, the U.S. Senate's Church Committee issued reports that condemned COINTELPRO, and new guidelines were implemented, however imperfectly, to prevent future domestic spying abuses. Many saw Fred Hampton's fate as a cautionary tale of unchecked government power. His name was frequently invoked in discussions about civil liberties and the lengths to which the FBI might go to stifle dissent. Over time, Fred Hampton became more than a man. He became a symbol of the heavy price paid in the struggle for justice and the importance of safeguarding democratic rights, even for society's dissenters. Fred Hampton was laid to rest on December 9, 1969, at the First Baptist Church of Melrose Park in Illinois. It was a cold, gray day, but more than 5,000 people turned out for his funeral. Mourners overflowed into the streets, a mix of grieving family, fellow activists, and ordinary citizens who felt compelled to honor the fallen leader. The Reverend Jesse Jackson, who had been a rising civil rights figure in Chicago and New Hampton, delivered a eulogy that captured the sorrow and anger of the moment. Jackson praised Hampton's commitment to his people and lamented the tragedy of a life cut so short. Many in the crowd wept openly. Others raised fists in salute, vowing that Fred's death would not be in vain. In the years and decades since, Fred Hampton's legacy has only grown. He has been remembered as a martyr of the Black liberation struggle and an enduring icon of resistance against racial oppression. In Black communities across America, his name is spoken alongside Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and other towering figures of the 1960s, a young man who, despite dying at 21, made an indelible mark on history. Hampton's rallying cries for freedom and solidarity continued to inspire new generations. "You can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution," he had said, and indeed, the ideas and spirit he championed live on. Chicago, the city that witnessed his rise and fall, has made efforts to memorialize him. In 1990, and again in 2004, the Chicago City Council passed resolutions declaring December 4th Fred Hampton Day in the city, ensuring that his name is officially commemorated on the anniversary of his death. Streets and murals in Chicago's West Side pay homage to Chairman Fred. His childhood home in Maywood has become something of a landmark. There have been campaigns to convert it into a museum or community center. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Hampton's legacy is the inspiration he provides to activists and movements that came after him. The example of his courage has been cited by countless organizers. In the movement for Black lives that emerged in the 2010s, you could see Hampton's imprint. Young leaders calling out systemic racism, forging broad coalitions, and emphasizing community empowerment. Some have explicitly invoked Hampton's name in speeches or carried signs reading, "I am a revolutionary," referencing one of Hampton's famous proclamations during protests. His life story, once suppressed, is now studied as part of the canon of American civil rights history. The 1971 documentary, The Murder of Fred Hampton, was an early attempt to tell his story on film. Decades later, the 2021 feature film, Judas and the Black Messiah, brought Hampton's life and assassination to a wide audience, with actor Daniel Kaluuya's portrayal earning an Academy Award. These works, grounded in historical research, ensure that new audiences learn about not only the tragedy of his death, but the rich purpose of his life. Hampton's family has carried the torch as well. His fiancée, who survived the raid while pregnant, has remained an active voice in preserving Hampton's legacy and fighting for social justice. Their son, Fred Hampton Jr., born just weeks after Hampton's funeral, grew up to become an activist in his own right, leading the Black Panther Party Cubs, an organization dedicated to continuing the Panthers' ideals and preserving the memory of 1960s freedom fighters. When you look back on Fred Hampton's life, it almost feels like it was meant for a storybook, one that's powerful but heartbreaking. He was a bright kid who grew into a passionate leader, standing at the heart of one of the most intense times in American history. He spoke of solidarity and justice, quickly gaining a following but also drawing the anger of those in power. And then, like so many Black leaders from that era, he was taken from us far too soon, his legacy growing stronger in death than it ever was in life. Fred Hampton was watched, set up, and ultimately killed by his own government. It's a truth that still shakes us today, forcing us to confront how far those in power will go when they feel threatened by the voices of the oppressed. But Hampton's power wasn't in his fearlessness alone. It was in what he represented, the hope and unity of everyday people. As we wrap up this video, let's all remember Hampton not just for the drama and tragedy of his story, but for his message of love and solidarity. His life reminds us that true power lies with the people, and that the fight for freedom and justice never ends, no matter the obstacles. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Black Journals for more thought-provoking stories. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you soon.